Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. Last month on this channel we looked at the history of the original entry in the Bloody Roar series. This maiden installment from this fighting game franchise would introduce us to the world of zoanthropes, fighters who have the power to transform into half human, half animal beasts. This impressive feature would lead the game to stylistically have an altered beast-like appeal, separating it somewhat from the other titles in the highly saturated fighting game market. While it was this game that would set the wheels in motion for a successful series, the Bloody Roar entry that seems to generate the most praise and nostalgia would be this game's sequel. When it comes to Bloody Roar games, many consider Bloody Roar 2 to be the king of fighters. However, reading many reviews from the time period, this certainly would be difficult to believe. You see, some well-known game review sites would only give this perceived cult classic 5 and 6 out of 10s. So, what exactly was going on here? Is Bloody Roar 2 an extremely flawed game that is overly celebrated due to modern nostalgia goggles? Or were these critics onto something when giving it such low scores? Well, let's look back at the history of this one and try and find out. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the truth about Bloody Roar 2, a game that some critics hated. Less than 2 years after the success of their previous animalistic game, developers Ating and Raising, who were behind other cult favourites such as Terror Diver, were back with their second polygonal fighting game. This 1999 game that was released in both arcades and for the Sony PlayStation was known as Bloody Roar 2, Bringer of the New Age in Europe and Japan, whereas in North America it would be marketed under the title of Bloody Roar 2, The New Breed. Story-wise, this second entry in the series would feature events that are set chronologically 5 years after the previous game. And the zoanthropes who had gotten into a conflict with the evil Tylon Corporation from the first title have since been living fairly normal and peaceful lives. Well, as normal as things can be for members of the furry fandom, I suppose. Bloody Roar, more like bloody freaks. Jokes aside, for those who can morph into their personas, a peaceful life for them doesn't last long, as it is soon revealed to the entire world that the zoanthropes lifestyle exists. This leads to tension and hostilities breaking out between the humans and furries, with many normies becoming fearful after learning of their existence. Like in all divisive political situations, this of course led to a counter-movement, giving birth to the Radical Zoanthrope Liberation Front, or ZLF for short. These proud boys believe in furry supremacy and are so extreme that they don't only detest normies, but they also hate other furries who do not believe in supremacy. Meanwhile, Alan Gaddo, a figure known for promoting understanding between zoanthropes and humans, becomes a fugitive for unclear reasons. Several rebel zoanthropes are thrown into a battle with the ZLF, and Gaddo with the fate of the world at their hands. To put it simply, the story of the game is basically an X-Men ripoff, which in itself was inspired by social issues experienced by minority groups in America. So an established, well-trodden narrative built around those who are different and the conflicts it creates. Thinking about it, those who are currently whinging about politics being in Marvel comics have clearly not been reading them for very long, as Superman punched Adolf Hitler in the face years prior to the United States even declaring war. Video games and comic books have always been used as a device for building compelling stories around certain issues, and in this regard Bloody Roar 2 is no different. Speaking of Bloody Roar 2's story, you won't believe who it transpires the leader of the Furry Liberation Front appears to be, bloody ShenLong, the man we have constantly been told for ages that we must defeat to stand a chance. It does however turn out though that ShenLong is actually a puppet under the control of Hajime Busuzima, who masquerades as the group's right hand man. After a player has defeated them and disbanded the ZLF, it unfolds that the game's true final boss is Gaddo from the previous game, which is kind of weird as I cannot recall a fighting game off the top of my head where a playable character from an earlier game gets promoted to the role of final boss, which is kind of underwhelming, Gado has become a fugitive to escape attention, to band together and create a movement with the aim to achieve peace and reconciliation between the zoanthropes and humans. Basically, he is the Professor Xavier of the story. Often more important than the story itself in a fighting game is the playable lineup of characters themselves. So what did Bloody Roar 2 bring to the table in this regard that differed from what we received previously? In a bold move, only 4 characters would return who had previously debuted in the prior entry. These include Yugo, the wolf zoanthrope, Alice the rabbit, Long the tiger, and of course Gado the lion, who we have already mentioned when talking about this game's story. The other 7 fighters were created specifically for this game, meaning players would get a ton of new characters to experiment with in combat. This would include Bakaru the mole, Uriko the cat, Stun the insect, Sheena the leopard, Hajima the chameleon, Jenny the sexy bat, and of course ShenLong the tiger, who you must defeat to stand a chance of beating this game. So now we have got all of that out of the way, let's discuss the gameplay, in which many fans seem to love so much. Bloody Roar 2 would see the return of Beast Mode, which in the first game was known as Rage Mode. This is each character's ability to transform Altered Beast style, which when performed allows players to initiate harsh attacks, recover lost health, become faster in combat, or deal more powerful blows. New to the mechanics would be the introduction of what are known as Beast Drives. These are essentially what are known in other fighting games as super attacks. When performing these flashy manoeuvres, they even initiate cutscenes, making inflicting that extra substantial damage on opponents all the more satisfying. Like Beast Modes, each character has their own Beast Drive that varies from character to character, allowing for a lot of experimentation and opportunities to explore which fighter works best for you. These new features would lead to the amount of juggling that can be executed in this sequel increasing dramatically from the previous outing, allowing for all sorts of arrays of satisfying combos. It is these sort of improvements which I would imagine have helped Bloody Roar 2 rise to its cult status today, with it also being possible to learn and improve at playing the game through the title's Watch Mode. While on the subject of modes, the game contains a traditional style arcade mode, the sort of which we are all more than familiar with, along with an established versus mode for expected player-on-player combat. The game also contains a survivor mode, which once again isn't too out of the ordinary, but for extra playability there is also a story mode. This is where the tale unfolds that I went to detail on covering earlier, involving the Furry Liberation Front and all of those shenanigans. This mode helps us understand the origin of each animal/human lifestyler, giving us a deeper understanding of Bloody Roar, or should I say, Bloody Lore. Yeah! An amusing feature of the first Bloody Roar game was how customizable it was, sharing similarities with the cheat mode you could activate in GoldenEye, which of course was a highly popular game from around the same time frame. In Bloody Roar 2's custom mode, weird and wonderful features such as big-headed characters and after images are back, once again giving players of this game an extra layer of laughs when playing it with friends. Ah, multiplayer couch play, those were certainly the days. So, if everything I described sounds pretty fine and dandy, what did the journalists write back in the day that would frame this title in such a negative light? Let's take a look. GameSpot would score this title 6.1 out of 10. They would describe the game as suffering from second best status due to the exclusion of integral gameplay elements that should never have been messed with. They would write, the problem is that it is a repeat of the first game. Gratuitous character swapping aside, little has changed from the first game, prompting the question, why bother? Why bother indeed when Bloody Roar 2 actually takes a step back and removes the ease of executing the sidestep? For reasons unfathomable, somebody actually went ahead and removed the perfectly functional sidestep, which was the main reason the American version of Bloody Roar 1 was a fairly balanced fighter. Interestingly, while bashing the game for not including the sidestep, they would mention there is an option available to activate it anyway, using custom mode, so personally, I don't see this as that great of an issue. They would also add regarding this game's sidestep that it's hardly intuitive and only serves to give the computer an additional edge while you struggle with the controls. Without this function, Bloody Roar 2 reverts to the all-out frontal assault that the import version of the first game was. GameSpot would also criticise the game for what they thought was a lack of replayability when they would write, while the new characters are much better than the ones they replaced, and the number of available moves per character has increased, the incentive to keep on playing wanes severely after a few rounds. The review site would also compare the game unfavourably with the Tekken series, writing, "You'd be foolish to call Bloody Roar 2 a Tekken killer. It's really disappointing because it really could have been." Unfortunately, while Surprise developer 18 Racing could have used Bloody Roar 1 as a blueprint for even greater things with a sequel, it appears as if the team dropped the ball. Perhaps their biggest criticism of the game though was when comparing it to the previous entry, writing, "In contrast to the original American version of Bloody Roar 1, Bloody Roar 2 is a marginal improvement that still suffers from second best status due to the exclusion of integral gameplay elements that should never have been messed with. The game is a major disappointment for such a promising series." While GameSpot would have positive things to say about the game, the review is pretty scathing for a video game that so many now champion as a gem of a title, and displays that the game's reputation has not always been as clean as it is perceived today. Building on this, GameRevolution.com would score the game even lower, giving it just a 5 out of 10. Like many journalists from the period, when it comes to Bloody Roar 2, Game Revolution would not just take issue with the game they were reviewing, but with the entire fighting game genre as a whole. They would write, "Fighting games are becoming more and more stagnant, as everyone tries to jump on the bandwagon with a Me Too 3D fighter. Take Bloody Roar 2 for instance. Borrowing heavily from other recent games, this title just doesn't stand out. Bloody Roar 2 offers nothing that hasn't been done before." Like GameSpot, Game Revolution 2 would bring up the sidestepping, penning the sidestep command, which has become a standard in the 3D fighter nowadays, can only be selected in the options menu. Bloody Roar 2 takes control aspects from other principal fighting games and meshes them together, but the meshing tends to get tangled. They would criticise the control scheme as a whole, stating, "The control style just isn't clean, making this game feel more like the button mashing variety." Game Revolution would also criticise the look of the game and the characters, writing, "Unfortunately, the backgrounds feel lifeless and empty. Most importantly, the fighters just lack charisma. Here you get a woman rubbing her chest saying, 'I love it when you fight so sexy' in a Transylvanian accent, while her character bio says she's British." They would also add that Bloody Roar 2 includes second-rate voice actors and a third-rate announcer. Most of these guys sound just wrong. The announcer is completely devoid of excitement. Instead of getting pumped up for an exciting match, I felt more pumped up to go do something else. Anything else. Their final thoughts on the game would be, Bloody Roar 2 is a game that you just don't want to spend that much time with. It's fine for a try or two, and nothing more. These fairly negative takes on the game are interesting in how contrasting they are with the modern consensus that Bloody Roar 2 was a great little game. So is there a truth really that Bloody Roar 2 is a very flawed title, or is there something more to all of this? While these reviewers did bash the game somewhat, even back in the day there were some far more positive takes on the game released. IGN for example would adore this game that is now so often perceived as a good egg, so clearly not all of their writers were quite as ignorant as they are often labelled. Still, it is simply impossible to spell ignorant without IGN. Writer Doug Perry would summarise that, "In the waning years of the PlayStation, the last fighters to appear on the system have been excellent. It's as if the good ones are only getting better and better. That's definitely true for Bloody Roar 2, a great looking game that is deep in gameplay and in its satisfying fighting system. Out of everyone, Hot Games would place the game on a higher pedestal than any other publication, loving the game so freaking much that they would give it 100 out of 100. Concluding, it's a beast-changing, head-slapping, draw-ripping brawler with attitude and style, and sex. Always a good combination." So bearing all of this in mind, what exactly can we draw from all of this? What truly is the truth about Bloody Roar 2? Well, one thing is for certain. This particular entry in the series now has huge support behind it, over 23 years removed from its release, so the development team behind the game clearly got something right. While I still need to look at some of the later entries in the series in more depth, there is no doubt that this entry is the most celebrated of the bunch, despite there now being a plethora of Bloody Roars to now choose from. Bringing into account that Bloody Roar is now a dead franchise, it appears that absence has only made the heart grow fonder, with online praise for this title rising by the day. Looking back, while it is clear that the game has some flaws that could have been ironed out a little better, a large amount of the criticism appears to be from the fact that journalists overall were simply sick of the swaths of polygonal fighters that Bloody Roar 2 was surrounded by. Removed from this period though, Bloody Roar now further stands out for what it was, an awesome game from this genre with a brilliant transformation mechanic that helped make the game a lot more timeless than many others from this period. I for one can fully acknowledge that some of the criticism given to this game over the period was perfectly acceptable when looking at the game through the lens of the era. But when you isolate Bloody Roar 2 as a standalone experience separate from other fighting games of that time, it becomes a lot clearer why this game is so unforgettable and why people love it so much. Maybe furries aren't so bad after all. So ladies and gentlemen, that was the truth about Bloody Roar 2, a game that some critics hated. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of today's video, and if you would be keen for me to create a video on the next entry in the Bloody Roar series. There are still plenty of fighting games out there for us to look back at and explore. If you want more videos like this, I have a huge library of similar content on playlists on this channel, so be sure to like, subscribe and hit that notification bell for regular weekly doses of fighting game goodness. Videos like this are in part made possible due to the wonderful people who back my work over on Patreon. Speaking of whom, special shout outs go out to A Murder of Crows, Carl Johnson, Sebastian Velez, Heyo, Paula Lopez, Nostalgia Collector, Ben Harradine, Coriomash Sr., Ron Dinched, Evan Border, Philip Manth, Azar Arkai, Dropkin Varela, Michael Calix, Ego, Jordan Durant, Ian Boyle, Nick Daniels, Prisazana, Daniel Daly, Computer Man, House of Attained, Gary Pinkett, ECU Professor, Johnny Holly, August Piazza, Justin Wang, Capcom vs SNK, Hermes Gonzalez, Man Shovel, Michael Hall, Sang Hee, Norma Stitz, Langston Miller, Noob, Sarah Powell, Flaming Renee, Marvin Araliga, TOG Driver, Louis Viant, John Bates, David Bale, Chris Fisk, Rick67, Antonio Rodriguez, Craig Jenkins, Synth Spaces, Punk Toast, Steve, Awesome Jacket Dude, and everybody else who backs my work over on the Patreon platform. Thank you for being a part of the most exclusive club on all of YouTube. But anyone can join, so is it exclusive really? So just shut the hell up and become one of my Patreon backers. That'd be much appreciated. Thank you. Bye.